Hey, today we're going to be copying a line drawing using a grid. So artists have used grids to help improve their drawing accuracy for a long time. You can draw a grid on your image, or you can use like an overlay and a template like this. But anyway, it helps you break down what you see and draw it more accurately. So we're going to practice this today with a simple line drawing of a flower, and we're going to transfer it onto here. You're going to need a pencil. Pencil's good because you can erase it if you make a mistake, but anything to draw with should be okay. You're either going to need to draw a grid on your reference image or use a transparent overlay like this, right? And then you can either draw a grid on your paper or you can print out a grid to draw on. Our grids today are 1 inch by 1 inch in each box, and they're 8 inches across by 10 inches tall. All right, let's get started. Let's go over to the drawing board.
All right, so we're going to be using a grid to copy the lines we see in this flower here. So I've got a transparent grid overlay and a printed grid sheet, and I will link those on this video. I'll have them available in class. I made another video where I showed how to do the grid, just with the ruler and a pencil. So I think this is a great skill to have. It tends to be a little bit complicated for some of my students. But if you're good at doing like kind of, math and ruler stuff and you would like to learn how to do it, there's a grid showing you, or there's a video showing you how to do it. So I encourage you to check that out. However, we're going to use kind of the simpler approach for this. So I'm going to be using the transparency and the printed sheet. Now, when you use the transparency, it's a good idea to tape it down just to make sure that things don't move around too much. You don't have to do that necessarily, but if your transparency gets bumped and shifts, it can make it a lot harder to deal with. All right, cool. All right, so the idea here is that we are using the grid to help us transfer these edges over. So we're going to be using the grid to help with things. I think it's a good tool for making your drawings more accurate, but it's also good for training you kind of how to see what's going on and draw that more accurately. So I think what we're going to do to start is I'm going to use a colored pencil and just kind of show you how the grid works. Okay. So the first thing that we can do with the grid is we can figure out which boxes our subject is in. Okay. So for example, these boxes are all empty. All right. And so I can use the grid to kind of figure out the positioning of the whole thing. So none of these boxes here have anything in them. And I'm Xing them out just to kind of give you an understanding of what I'm talking about here. But if you want to X them out on your drawing, you definitely can. You'll notice with the grid, I've got numbers going down the side and letters going across the top. That's so I can kind of reference the boxes like Battleship. So if I'm like, okay, what box is this here? This is G3. I can come over here, G3. I know that that's the box I'm looking at. Okay. So speaking of which, F2 is not going to have anything in it. So that's kind of the first thing. We got a little bit peeking up into G2. It can help you just understand like where your subject is not. There's not really anything in here. Comes close. There's like a little bit in there. And then you could do the same thing on the bottom. This whole row has got nothing in it. So I'm not going to be drawing there. And then these two also have nothing. This one has nothing. So all of those boxes are just going to have no drawing in them. So if I end up drawing in one of those boxes, I know I'm off course. The other thing you can do is help you figure out kind of the general shape of things. So we're going to use the colored pencil again to kind of flesh that out here. So this kind of comes up here, kind of across here. Now I'm doing this kind of quick and loose, so I don't necessarily want to be too convinced that this is going to be accurate later on. This is just sort of a guideline for where things seem to be in a very general sense. This is kind of what we're going to be doing next when we talk about using shape to help us draw. Kind of a similar sort of idea. But really, we're just kind of getting the big main shape here. I'm not going to worry about all these little stamen coming out just because they're very linear and not super blocky. So I'm going to kind of worry about them later. But this helps me get sort of the general shape of the whole thing here. So I can use that. Also, it's going to help me get my lines more specifically, but I'm not going to worry about that quite yet. I'm getting ahead of myself. Here. Let's see, this is 9 C and D, so it's right here. Yeah, okay, like that. Up here. But I'd encourage you to maybe take a quick pass with a colored pencil, just sort of really loosely sketch in where things are at. So that's really loose, and you can see it's really light too. You might not even really be able to see it very well. Anyway, I'm not worried because I can see it. Again, when you do sketch these out with a colored pencil, or if you're sketching lightly with a regular pencil, you don't need anybody else to be able to see it. You just need to draw light enough so that you can see what's going on. All right, so now we're going to try to get really accurate kind of line drawing happening. So let's pick a spot to start. Now, there's a number of ways we can do this. We can either go kind of square by square and complete them, or we can kind of follow different edges. So let's kind of give an example of what each of those would look like. And you can also switch back and forth between methods. So if we're doing square by square, we got nothing in this top row, right? Got nothing in the second row until we get to 2D. 2D gonna be right here. So now I can look at how far over this line starts, okay? And what I want to do is kind of judge. I want to think about, is it halfway over? Is it a third of the way over? Is it a quarter of the way over? I want to think about fractions, okay? So this is a little bit less than halfway. So I might kind of start the mark at a little bit less than halfway. Another trick I can do is I can take my pencil and I can actually measure it. So I'm going to put the tip of my pencil right there where the two lines cross. I'm going to mark with my finger where that edge is. I'm going to put this over here. So I was a little bit off. So I'm going to kind of move over to right here. I can erase this. I would highly recommend for this face here that we use a pencil so that we can erase it if necessary. Now the nice thing here, going across, I can see how high that goes up, right? And I can make it go to that same level. I can just kind of look straight across like that. If I wanted to, I could also measure it the same way, or I can estimate it. That looks like it goes a little bit less than halfway up. All right, so then I have everything in that box filled. I might move on to the next box now. Now, you can decide how careful you want to be. It might take you 3 hours to get this done if you're being super meticulous. But I would say, at least check every once in a while. So that box done, that box done. Next, I'm going to move over here. Looks like there's a little bit of a ball here just sticking up. Okay, and next I could go to the next row and work my way through. Same way. All right. So let's see over here. This looks like it's a little bit, this edge here, it's a little bit more than halfway over from the left. So I'm going to go about halfway from the left and then a little bit more. Almost touches this line up here. Comes down like this. Curves in a little bit. So the other things you can look at is look at this shape here. What shape is this making? That's called negative space. looking at the negative space can sometimes be easier than drawing the positive space or the thing you're drawing, your subject. Sometimes the negative space is an easier shape to draw, especially if you're like drawing spaces in between like leaves and branches or things like that. Sometimes those are simpler shapes than the actual subject. I feel like this maybe wants to be a little bit higher up. Don't be afraid to erase. It also doesn't need to be perfect. But yeah, I can work my way through just doing one box at a time. If that appeals to me, that's a perfectly reasonable way to do it. The other thing, the other approach you might take, and you can kind of mix these approaches as you desire. Hold on, let me finish this box. Again, I'm going to look at this negative space. Look at this shape that's made here. Try to make sure that that looks right too. I want to make sure my subject looks right, but also the negative space. This comes down a little bit further than halfway. Say about right there. Right here. All right, I could go through the entire drawing that way. Probably end up pretty decent if I'm careful about it. So the other thing we can do is just kind of follow edge by edge. So let's start right here in box 5A, right at the bottom here. So our starting point looks like it's maybe 2/3 of the way over. So if we divide this into thirds like that, looks like it's about here. Let's check it. You can always check and measure. If you've got a ruler handy, you could even use the ruler and check it. We usually measure with the pencil because we always have a pencil when we're drawing. But obviously the ruler is already marked for that. So if you've got a ruler, you might as well, right? It's about 1/4 inch. It's a little more than 1/4. I think 1/3 is more accurate. Anyway, so then I just kind of follow. I want to look over here while I'm drawing. And just glance back to kind of correct my course as needed. One thing that can help though is curves are kind of hard to draw. So if you kind of break it into almost angular line segments and then curve it out, that can be a little easier sometimes. It's going to come up here. So one edge is going to flow down, and I can decide which edge I want to follow. Let's maybe do the outside first. Let's follow this edge here. But I can use that and just follow edge by edge. And then I just have to go in and make sure I get all of my edges. So rather than kind of showing you this whole thing, I'm going to time lapse it and I'm going to draw most of the rest in, and then we'll talk about the other stuff. So here we go. Time lapse, start now. All right, so I wanted to get to where I had done like most of the edges here, and now we've got kind of a lot of texture happening in here. Now I think you've got two options. You can kind of move through here and record all of the texture faithfully. That's perfectly fine. But I think, you know, at some point you can also kind of revert to just kind of mimicking the texture that you see. I think it becomes overly burdensome sometimes when you got a lot of little things going on, spacing everything out and getting it in the exact right position. Now, if you want something that's like totally photorealistic, that's totally fine. And you should go in there and get everything as accurate as possible. But I think at some point you can get away with just kind of getting the general texture in. So rather than count all of these little hooked points and get them the exact right number with the exact right spacing, I'm just kind of looking at where they are and just trying to add them in. I'll do the same thing with the spots. So I think that this is one of the tricky things in drawing that you should think about a little bit is like, when does it kind of become better to just kind of mimic the general texture and feel of something rather than getting every detail exactly correct? So yeah, I'm just kind of going with general texture throughout. And I'm going to kind of look at the shape that occupies, kind of this upper. You might even get in here with your colored pencil. Kind of comes like this, and up here a little bit. I might even block in the shape that I was going to fill, but then just kind of come in with the shapes that I'm seeing and create a similar texture here. I'm not going to have the exact same number of objects, but similar sort of idea. And that really depends how exact you want your drawing to match your reference. But it's the same thing for like working from a photo as well. At some point, you have to consider kind of the level of attention you want to pay and the level of detail that you as an artist, as well as your tools, are capable of. And kind of figure out where you want to draw that line. Really important concept that somebody expressed well to me a long time ago is the more detailed you get, the more important it is that it's correct. So if you're going super detailed, you have to have everything pretty close to perfect. If you're pulling that detail back a little bit, you can get away with being sort of vague and just kind of having the general idea correct without worrying about all the specifics being 100% accurate. All right, so that's the project. That's the idea. Again, this is just kind of giving you some tools for getting everything laid out more accurately. This is really about kind of positioning on the paper as much as anything else. But it should also give you some exercise in like how you have to look at this and break it down. Because ultimately, we're going to be trying to learn how to do what we're doing now without the use of the grid. So the grid is to kind of give us an idea of how we need to look at it and how we need to draw things out. But ideally, we want to get to the point where the grid is no longer necessary. So as we continue to do sketchbook work, feel free to use the grid or not as desired. It's kind of up to you what you want to do, and you're kind of free to make your own decisions based on your comfort level. Again, with my class, everybody's kind of coming in with different levels of experience and different backgrounds. So we try to accommodate everybody and give people tools when they need them, but encourage them to see if they can do it without the tools when they're ready for that. And you should do the same. Ideally, the tools are really useful for having around and for getting the most accurate job possible completed. But a lot of us don't necessarily want to be dependent on those tools forever. All right, I'm going to time lapse the rest of this. All right, so hopefully that gives you an idea of how to use the grid. Again, this is really good for kind of figuring out which squares your subject occupies, sort of a big picture idea of scale and placement, but it's also really good for helping you focus on one small square at a time, one small area. You can even go in and divide these into smaller squares if you want, especially if you drew it out. Let's take a look at that. Let's say this area is a little complex. I can go in and I can divide this square into 4 more smaller squares. It'd probably be a good idea to use a ruler for that, but I didn't, but you could. You can kind of subdivide things even further if you need a higher level of detail. So it works really well for kind of general positioning as well as for focusing on smaller details. The idea is also to train you how to not use the grid by using the grid, by establishing kind of the bigger layout and where everything's going to be, getting it positioned so you're not drawing it off the paper or super small in a weird spot. But then working on focusing in on details once we establish the bigger picture. So we're going to be kind of continuing these themes and ideas. We're going to be talking about using shapes to establish our general layout and proportion, and then going in and using lines to get the details. So that's what we'll be covering next. Anyway, I hope that this was useful and informative to you and gives you some ideas for things to work on or how to move forward. And we will see you next time. So take care and goodbye for now.